Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the legendary career of Ally McCoist. But, we're not just looking at him as a pure athlete. No, we're looking at him as a predator, someone who absolutely mastered the geometry of the penalty box. If you know anything about the history of the old firm, that wild, fierce mix of tactical obsession and intense tribalism over in Glasgow, then you already know Ally McCoist is the vibrant golden thread running right through the whole shebang. But today, we're going way past the highlight reels. We're going to break down the actual forensic anatomy of what made him so literally lethal. 355. Just let that number sink in for a sec. 355 goals for Rangers. For over a decade, there was this specific, totally unmistakable sound that defined Ibrox Stadium. It was this massive, rhythmic, guttural roar as the ball hit the back of the net, instantly followed by the name Super, just echoing from the stands. That number, 355, it means McCoist didn't just score goals. He literally authored the most prolific chapter in the club's entire history. But, the sheer volume of those goals actually begs a pretty fascinating question. The paradox here is really fascinating. I mean, how did a relatively small striker just absolutely conquer the game? Because if you look at his physical profile, he wasn't the fastest guy out there on the pitch. He wasn't the tallest either. Actually, he wasn't even the most technically gifted player sitting in that Rangers dressing room. So how on earth does someone with a fairly average physical toolkit become one of the absolute most feared strikers of his generation? Well, the secret lies in sheer unadulterated instinct and a brilliant footballing brain. Seriously, if you handed McCoist's profile to a modern football scout today, they'd probably pass. You know how it is. They're looking for that huge vertical leap, lightning sprint speed, the perfect body mass index. McCoist? He likely would have failed those modern scouting reports. But here's the thing. Instead of raw power, he possessed this incredibly rare, almost architectural understanding of the penalty area. He swapped out sprint speed for spatial awareness and vertical leaps for, probability calculations. It's like he was playing the game in his mind before his feet even touched the ball. Section 1. Mastering the 6-yard box, the private study. Okay, so while defenders were busy grappling with all the obvious physical threats, the bigger, faster, much more intimidating strikers, McCoist was constantly repositioning himself right into their blind spots. We call this cognitive lead time. Basically, by the time a defender reacted to the flight of a cross coming into the box, McCoist had already finished his movement. He wasn't faster on his feet. Rather, he was a half-second faster in his mind. Which brings us to what I like to call the art of the rebound. When you actually analyze his 355 goals, a massive chunk of them came from second chances. But let me tell you, it was absolutely not luck. He executed these really precise steps. Number 1, anticipating exactly where a shot would be saved or ping off the post. Number 2, sliding quietly into that blind spot. And 3, executing the cold-blooded finish. He wasn't just chasing the football around, he was chasing the mathematical probability of exactly where that ball was going next. Picture this scenario on the pitch for a second. A defender is just starting to process the trajectory of an incoming cross. Right there, there's this tiny gap, a sort of latency between the defender's brain recognizing the danger and their legs actually moving to intercept it. Well, that latency is exactly where Ally McCoist lived. He exploited that tiny little delay in the defensive structure, so he was already perfectly poised to strike while everyone else was frankly still trying to figure out what the heck was happening. Section 2. Thriving in the Old Firm, the ultimate audit. Now, the Old Firm derby is a completely different beast. It's a game where the pitch feels dramatically smaller, the tackles are bone-crunching, and the psychological pressure is literally suffocating. Yet somehow, McCoist totally thrived in this intense environment. He scored an incredible 27 goals against Celtic. And that record isn't just a fun statistic. It is the absolute cornerstone of his legacy, cementing him forever as a folk hero in Glasgow. So how did he achieve those numbers? He harnessed what we can think of as controlled aggression. See, McCoist deeply understood the narrative stakes of these derbies. The supporters were desperate for a symbol of defiance, and he gave it to them through the absolute most potent medium available, scoring a goal. Honestly, it didn't even matter what his form looked like leading up to the match. The second that derby kicked off, he became the literal personification of the club's desire to win, turning all that collective hope in the stands into hard reality on the scoreboard. Section 3. Evolution of a forward, tactical adaptation. You have to remember, McCoist's career spanned a massively transformative period for the British game. When he first started out at Rangers in the 1980s, the sport was totally dominated by raw power and aerial bombardment. But as the years rolled on, he had to survive this shift to complex zonal marking systems in the early 90s, and eventually the exhausting high-tempo pressing of the late 90s. And he survived these seismic shifts by constantly adapting his function on the pitch. He was always finding new ways to outsmart increasingly sophisticated defenses. And while he was navigating all those tactical shifts, he was also dealing with the inevitable reality of aging. Back in his 20s, he had that crucial extra yard of pace to beat his man. But as he hit his 30s and started losing that speed, well, he didn't just fade away. Instead, he forced himself to refine his game. He shifted his style to become even more unbelievably clinical in close-quarters combat inside the box. He realized a really important truth. You don't actually need to outrun defenders if you can just outthink them. So to compensate for that lost step, he mastered this specific, totally cold-blooded technique, the first-time finish. By eliminating that extra touch to control the ball, he denied the goalkeeper those precious split-second milliseconds they need to close down the angle. These are exactly the types of goals that look, incredibly easy when you're watching them on TV. But in reality, they require a level of spatial awareness and supreme composure that only the absolute elite possess.
Section 4. The Super Standard, a Psychological Performance.
He taught us that goal scoring is not purely a physical act, it is a psychological one. That thought right there perfectly captures the true essence of his impact. McCoist basically acted as a bridge between generations of Rangers supporters. He was the guy who could lead the line, take the heaviest tackles, completely ignore the vitriol from rival crowds, and still deliver that fatal strike. He turned the very act of scoring into a performance, a real celebration of the club's identity. When McCoist scored, it was never just a point added to the board, it was this massive, almost physical release of collective tension for thousands of people. Ultimately, football history is absolutely full of greats with flashy highlight reels. But McCoist? He represents a totally different kind of greatness. He redefined the expectations of his position. He didn't need to be the strongest. He didn't need to be the fastest. He only needed to be the most prepared. He looked at the completely chaotic game of football as a series of geometry problems just waiting to be solved. And in doing so, he set a gold standard for what a striker can achieve using pure intellect and instinct. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought. Think about the modern game of football today. It's driven by hyper-analytical scrutiny, advanced data, rigorous defensive coaching that squeezes every single inch of space out there on the pitch. So, could the master of the blind spot, a player built entirely on cognitive lead time and spatial probability, survive and thrive in today's environment? Or is the super standard a masterpiece of a bygone era? It's definitely a fascinating question to ponder. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. And remember to always keep questioning the geometry of the game.